Welcome to the Nano podcast. I'm your host, Will Tjernlund, and I'm excited to have you join me on this journey through the world of nano companies. For the past decade, I've talked to thousands of business owners across various industries. It's been an enlightening experience revealing the vast tapestries of entrepreneurship and innovation that thrives beneath the surface of mainstream media coverage. Each week, I will interview different leaders of nano-cap publicly traded companies to learn about their history, what they do now, and their future. As a reminder, none of this information is financial advice, and it is all for entertainment purposes only. Let's start this week's episode. Hi, everyone. In this week's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with John Yu, the CEO of Kairos Pharma, stock ticker KAPA. Kairos Pharma is focused on developing therapeutics that reverse the damaging effects of cancer on the immune system. John, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Will, for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I look into your LinkedIn and your background a bit, and I noticed that not only have you been to like the top hospitals, working there for decades, at the top schools and such, but also been doing kind of research along the way. So can you tell me just a bit more about kind of your career from starting off in medical school to where you're at today?
Yeah, so I had the blessing of being born in very interesting times in science. And so when I went to Stanford from where I grew up in Hawaii, this was the birth of molecular biology. Stanley Cohen at Stanford had developed a thing called ligase to put pieces of DNA together, and Herb Boyer at Berkeley discovered restriction enzymes to cut pieces of DNA together. And that really formed the birth of molecular biology. And so I really thought this was a cool thing that you could cut up genes and make gene products. And one of the first companies to do that was Genentech. And I thought it was cool that they could make drugs from this scientific tool. And so I had the pleasure of working at Genentech as a summer intern in their molecular biology department, and just saw how cool it was to cut up genes, put it into different bacteria, and make enzymes that can, treat people with like growth hormone, insulin, really amazing drugs that came from genes. And so with that, I went to work at the Pasteur Institute and worked on more genes that are involved in immunology. And Pasteur Institute in Paris really was born out of vaccines that Louis Pasteur had made. And so it was, and also at the time, Luc Montagnier had identified the AIDS virus, and that was a huge time of the beginning of AIDS, and so really interesting times, and that's where I developed my love for immunology and potentially using immunology to treat cancers, which really was a scourge, and at that time was only being treated with chemotherapy, which is is a really harsh thing. I mean, very effective sometimes, but really it wastes the human body. And so I thought, well, if we can use the immune system, which already fights off cancer, then maybe this will be a way to, help patients. And so I went to Harvard Med School after that, worked on immunology and gene therapy, which was another growing field of putting genes into human bodies and not just into bacteria to make proteins. So. From there, I came to Cedars-Sinai and worked on immunology, and that's where my interest was. I also trained as a neurosurgeon, and so I put those two kinds of things together: immunology and brain cancer. I loved the treatment of brain cancer because you have this beautiful organ of the brain, and then you have this terrible-looking brain cancer that just eats away at it. And it eats away at not only the brain itself, but it eats away at everything that makes us human, from our personalities to our ability to move and to think and to have emotions. And so between that and the immunology that, I thought would make an impact in the brain cancers, I really felt like I came to my calling.
So to take a step back, were you a nerdy kid in Hawaii who was already into gene editing and you knew that the breakthroughs were happening in Northern California? Or did you get to college and see the breakthroughs were happening and you said, I got to be a part of it? Or
Yeah.
where did they come from?
Well, I was born in Korea. I moved to Hawaii when I was 5, and my parents, my dad was a diplomat there, and then he decided to stay ostensibly for my education, and they were hardworking immigrants and always valued education, and I loved Hawaii. It was beautiful, but I always wanted to get out. I thought there was something greater. There was the world out there with interesting things happening. And so when I went to Stanford, I had no idea about biology or gene editing or anything like that. But I found this incredible thing that was happening in the back door of, the university. And so that's when I kind of got hooked on to this amazing area of biology, and that's what sort of propelled me through.
And then another quick side question. You've been to like literally the greatest universities in the world. Like, which one's like more your style and like your favorite?
Yeah, well, I mean, Stanford's kind of laid back, with the California influence, so that's nice. Harvard Med School, is an amazing place, and it really feels like you're standing on the shoulders of giants that really made an impact in medicine and biomedical research. So, I mean, they're all great institutions, and I'm just really lucky to have been part of them.
Awesome. So, okay, we're kind of getting closer and closer to present day. So, you're working as a researcher, you're working in hospitals and such. Where did the idea of you becoming a CEO pop in, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so I think I developed an interest in entrepreneurship and biomedical research, very early on when I worked at Genentech, and realized what an impact that biomedical science can have, and biotech research and companies can have in the world. I mean, Genentech, really started off the whole revolution of gene products and using genes to impact medicine. And so, one of the frustrations of being an academic researcher is that you can learn mechanisms of how things work, and you can maybe, give it to a couple of patients, but you can't really bring it to a lot of patients. And so there's this valley of death that the NIH doesn't fund trials like that, and you have to raise funds through either pharma or biotech companies to be able to take some ideas of drugs and actually get it to patients and see if it works. And so that's where the idea of trying to form a company to advance some of these therapies that we discovered in the lab came from.
And then, so how does that happen exactly? So you find some breakthroughs, and then you're like, I'm going to go find investors, or you're talking to someone who already is working in the banking industry kind of about it, and they go, hey, you ever thought about starting a company? Or like,
yeah.
what kind of was that next step?
Well, so it largely came from, when you have scientific discoveries that impact therapies, for instance, then, you'll patent the idea to protect it. And that's how innovations from the US really gets monetized, as you know. And so, we patented some of these ideas, and some of them we actually received patents on. And so, it seemed like something of value. And so we thought to try to advance it into the clinic. And then that's when we sort of hit the wall of, well, NIH will fund, small things, but it's not going to fund, 20, 30, 50 patient trials. And so that's when we thought of the idea to license those patents into a company. And I've talked to different people that are involved in that. And so, you learn what other people teach you. And the pathway that I learned was through a public vehicle, so we just took our ideas and really funded it with NIH grants till we could, and probably about 25 million in NIH grants really supported these projects up to early phase clinical trials. And then we licensed the technologies and tried to get funding to really advance those further. And that's why, we formed Kairos Pharma, and we tried to get out into the New York Stock Exchange. And Kairos is a Greek word that means the perfect moment or opportune moment in time. And so it felt relevant in a lot of ways that we want to intervene at the opportune moment when a patient becomes resistant to a drug. And also it was the opportune moment for us to get into the public capital markets, to raise funds, to actually propel these trials toward the future, to really show that they work, because we had a great confidence that they worked, not only in the bench in the lab, but with animal studies, and then with the patients that we treated. We saw that, that the therapy had legs. And so that's when we said, okay, we're going to go all in and try to go public and try to raise the money to do all this.
And what made you want to choose public markets versus private markets?
It's a funny thing is that's what I kind of knew and what I was taught. I'm sure most people go the private route, and we didn't know any VC funds. We didn't know anything. We just knew, well, we have these therapies, and one way and it was very difficult to raise funds. And, people told me, at least if you're public, people, it's the liquid stock, so people can get in and out. So it's, in a sense, easier to raise funds. And the past couple of years have been exceedingly hard for the biotech industry in terms of getting funding, public, private, or anything. But we just thought public would actually give us the opportunity to raise more funds when we needed to. So that's why we went public.
It's funny you answer that way, because I've asked CEOs before, and they've said, well, it's what I know. And so
Yeah.
it's one guy was like, yeah, no, it's like my sixth company I brought in public. It's just kind of what I do. And so it's like, all right, well,
yeah,
if it makes sense for you and it's what you know, yeah, obviously go forward with it.
So it's funny.
We've tipped around it a little bit, but like, in your own words, what is Kairos Pharma? What do you do? What's the problem you solve?
Yeah, so as a neurosurgeon, one of the most difficult things that I have to do is give a patient the diagnosis of a brain cancer. And as difficult as that is, it pales in comparison to 6 months or a year later when the cancer comes back, because the tumors become resistant to the chemotherapy that's used to treat it. And so what Kairos Pharma is focused on doing is reversing the cancer drug resistance that develops to most cancer drugs, and also reverse the immune suppression that's caused by cancer. So that's what we do. We reverse cancer drug resistance, and we reverse immune suppression that's caused by cancer. And so what we've identified is a protein that is made in cancer cells as they're being treated with different therapeutics. And what this protein does is it makes it resistant to the drugs, and it's on the cell surface of cancer cells. And so we've developed an antibody that targets this protein on the surface of cancer cells, and that prevents that protein from giving the cancer cell a signal to overcome that chemotherapy or whatever drug is being used. And so when we use this antibody, it reverses the cancer drug resistance, and then whatever drug you're using to treat that cancer can now work again. And so this is a mechanism that's relevant for prostate cancer. It's relevant for lung cancer, and so we have a phase 2 trial in prostate cancer and a phase 1 trial in lung cancer. And it appears to work in breast cancer, colon cancer, and head and neck cancer. So it treats a wide variety of cancers. And more importantly, it allows the drugs that are used for these cancers, which work great initially, but then eventually fail, it allows those drugs to rework again. So our drug doesn't necessarily treat the cancer itself. It just treats the resistance so that other drugs can work again.
So here's the time where I start asking dumb medical questions. So is there certain types of cancer that are more resistant to, like, say, chemotherapy, where like brain cancer becomes resistant faster than if you have breast cancer, or they kind of all depend on the actual human?
No, they all. Well, one thing is for sure is drugs don't work forever, and they work for different periods of time, and even in different patients, they work differently. So, in one patient, it'll work for 6 months. For another patient, it'll work for a year. Some patients, it'll work for 2 years. But what you can count on is that eventually they'll become resistant to that drug. And so we've identified a mechanism. It's probably not the only mechanism, but it appears to be a central mechanism that impacts several different cancers with several different types of drugs, because it has such a strong survival signal for the cancer to withstand the chemotherapy. And, if you go into cancer research, you find that the more things you throw at the cancer, the more things it comes back to resist it. And so, this is my colleague, Neil Bomick at Cedars, that identified this mechanism and a drug that will reverse that mechanism. And so we're taking his identification and his research that found the central mechanism, and we're using it for these very significant cancers.
So real quick, when you do have a finding like that, is there like an actual just like aha moment in the lab, or is it after looking at data for months you finally come to a conclusion that, hey, we think this is the protein we have to go after? Or like, how does that happen? Because I see it in the movies, but how does it really happen?
Sometimes there are aha moments, but a lot of those aha moments are like when you test it a few months later, are like, oh, that really wasn't that great after all. But you're so inspired that you want to go after it. But there are some aha moments when, 6 months later you confirm it. And then you do, confirmatory studies in different types of cancers, and it works, in several of them. So you know that you have something real. And so that's when you have a second aha moment that confirms that, your first idea was really real.
Okay, speaking of a second, is there ever a time someone needs to go on like a second time to your treatment since they become immune again, and then they need to come back to you? And does it work again, or how would that work?
Yeah, so our drug doesn't necessarily work for all patients, but in prostate cancer, it appears to work for a majority of them. And what's important is that we've identified a 3-gene panel called a biomarker that distinguishes those patients that will respond to it versus those patients that won't. And we recently received a $3.2 million NIH grant that confirms what we've identified in this biomarker study. So if we can determine who will respond to the drug before we actually give it, then we can really stack the deck, in that we can only use the drug for those patients that'll work on. It's a kind of personalized medicine, and you've kind of heard that word, personalized medicine. And so, you personalize the treatment for the patient. And so not only does it help in individual patients, but it helps in clinical trials. For instance, if you have a biomarker that works, it increases the success of a phase 3 trial that allows commercialization of your drug from 55% to 76%. And so you can really reduce the number of patients that you need for a clinical trial, that reduce the cost significantly, and also you increase the likelihood of success of that clinical trial. So that's a very important component of all the therapies that we develop at Kairos Pharma, is developing a companion biomarker that will determine, which patients will respond to the drug or not.
So moving forward, what's the next steps in FDA approval for you? What phase are you in now? What do you need to do to get it so that you can be commercially available?
Right. So we're in a randomized phase 2 trial, which is a large 100 patient clinical trial that is randomized, meaning that it's randomized for patients to receive our drug with an antigen agent called apalutamide, or
So,
just
sorry,
apalutamide.
real quick. When you say randomized, do they still get to test to make sure that they have like the biomarkers ahead of time?
Yeah, that's a
Make
very
sure.
good
Okay.
question. Yeah, so we actually use the biomarkers to determine whether they're likely to respond or not. The FDA allowed us to test the biomarker, but not use them to put the patients onto the trial. So
Okay.
we use the biomarker to test whether, it's confirmed that they're going to respond, and then we're going to use that for the phase 3. So this phase 2 will use the same outcome measures as the phase 3, and we think that that we will see the effects of the drug in the phase 2 as much as the phase 3. So we have interim results coming out in early 2025, and hopefully we'll see an impact or difference in these two groups even at that time. And if that's the case, then we can, discuss with large pharma companies, whether they can help us or license the product or acquire us to figure out, how this drug may impact all those other drugs in the pharmaceutical industry.
That was going to be kind of my next question is, do you all want to come out with your own product? Do you want to license it? Do you want to sell the company? Or do you
Yeah.
just want to get it in customers, helping them as fast as possible, and whatever path that is, you just want to take that one?
So oftentimes, smaller biotech companies aren't the best companies to do commercialization, because you need a big group of representatives, drug reps that will, hawk not hawk, but, talk to different physicians about using your drug and so forth. So it's sort of a different, different skill set than small bio companies normally do. That being said, I think, we'll evaluate all our options at the time and clearly do what's best for our shareholders in terms of, either take it to a phase 3 ourselves, license the opportunity to a large pharma company, or consider merger and acquisition opportunities as they come.
So this next question is one I ask almost like all of our guests, since they tend to have these different types of backgrounds. So when you started becoming the CEO, what did you use as like a learning tool or a mentor to even just learn about all this stuff about public markets and what it takes to be a publicly traded company? Since you said you had an internship back in kind of the business world, but then had been out of the business world for decades.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. And, there are a lot of books out there. There are a lot of readings out there, podcasts, things about CEOs, about the industry that you can learn from that I did. And certainly I've had people in the industry, people that are directors in my company that have been there and have done deals with large pharma companies that I rely on and that I talk to. And so, so I try to get as much information as I can from as many people as I can.
And then from just like the culture point of view, you've been working in places where they have very, very strict processes and everything is kind of buttoned up all the time. And then you get to create now the culture from scratch. Like, what have you brought over? What have you been like, oh, thank God I don't have to do it this way anymore? What have you changed from like your medical career to now working in like a company that you get to have full control over?
Yeah. So I think, and you've heard this before in people, but, integrity is a very big thing, particularly, in business and particularly in a public vehicle where, there are a lot of potential issues and problems that come up. And so that's my number one goal. And Kairos also has actually a spiritual connotation as well, in that it's spiritually the right time for things. And so, I believe that things will happen if you do the right things at the right time. And so, that's what we try to do. On the other hand, it's a small company too. We have 4 people. We have Ram Murali, who's our VP of Research and Development, who does this Star Wars kind of research, looks at the X-ray crystallographic structure of a protein and finds the slot where a small molecule will fit and develops that molecule. And Neil Bomick is a biologist that looks at mechanisms of action, really a brilliant scientist that figured out the mechanism of this drug resistance. And I'm a clinician as well as an immunologist. And so I developed the translational research to take some of the basic findings into the clinic and then help with the clinical trials in terms of generating them. So we're a small company. On the other hand, people ask us how we're going to compete with the Pfizers and the Mercks of the world. But we think we're not, it's not necessarily competition because we have developed a drug that really can help all these other drugs become effective again when they start failing and become resistant. And so we think that we will be able to help a lot of these pharmaceutical drugs out there become effective again.
All right. So as we wrap up, if Kairos Pharma didn't exist, what other medical problems would you be trying to solve or would be working on? What other kind of things do you have in the back of your head, deep back there? You're like, okay, that's a problem that I've seen some promising research. I think I could solve that too. There's just not enough hours in the day. Yeah,
well, I think the whole area of psychotherapy and psychological and psychiatric illnesses is a very interesting area, and one that's really, in a lot of cases, a black hole in terms of understanding the complexities of, how psychiatric illnesses occur and how to best treat them. There's so many pathways, there's so many areas of the brain, but impact is being made, not only with pharmaceuticals, but with cognitive behavioral therapy and things that can really make a big impact too. So, I've seen the scourges of mental illness impact, family members and people that I'm close to. So, yeah, clearly that could be a big place for an impact to be made.
Awesome. And then kind of lastly, where do you see Kairos Pharma in 5 years? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What gets you excited?
Yeah, so our near-term goal is to show that our therapy works with these drugs to make them recover from resistance. I think that will make a big impact in the pharmaceutical industry. But we're also developing game-changing immunotherapy agents. One is targets what's called the GITR ligand and allows T cells to grow rapidly as well as to kill cancer cells more effectively. And then we've found the opposite mechanism to bring down T cells for autoimmune diseases and for organ transplantation. So these are huge areas of impact in immunology that we think we've identified a central checkpoint or a central gateway to affect T cells to either grow or diminish so we can impact these huge diseases like cancer and autoimmune diseases. So that's an area that we're actively trying to get into the clinic and that we're working on. And we think that we can have a real paradigm shifting therapy as that comes forward.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If people want to learn more about what Kairos Pharma is up to and learn more about the company, where should I send them?
They can go to kairospharma.com and they can get on our email list, and we're happy to send them all of the events that we're involved in, and hope that we can stay in touch, and they can contact me through the website as well, through the investors at kairospharma.com, and happy to talk with them about any of our molecules going forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And for those still listening, please remember to subscribe and review.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not provide financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or any offer to buy or sell any securities or to make any investment. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement, therefore, by NanoCap Podcast or its affiliates. The NanoCap podcast express disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented